Hello, welcome, beautiful people. Welcome back to the Art Heals podcast, to another episode today with our amazing chair of the Planetary Arts Movement, Dr. Joe Nurse. Welcome, Joe.
Hello, hi everyone. Such a pleasure to be able to join you on this podcast series. And Jana, a really huge thank you as well for making this possible to bring narrative and voice and depth of understanding as well for some of the key players in the planetary arts movement as we start our journey together. So a huge thank you for making this possible. Um, yeah, and delighted to be here.
My pleasure, Joe. It's an honor. And of course, I'm having so much fun. That's the most important, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So please, Joe, can you tell us about your background? I mean, I know a bit about you, but the audience would like to know where you come from and what's your journey? How did you come to art and to be the chair of the Planetary Arts Movement?
So, um, well, thank you. It's quite a key question, and it's not obvious, I think, to a lot of people. So I think it's a good place to start. And to be honest, doing this podcast has made me have to sit down and reflect about my journey as an artist. And as I said to you earlier, I've had a lovely afternoon sat under a tree, just
Wow.
reflecting on my journey as an artist, but how that wove um, and interconnected with my professional journey as a doctor. Um, so many of you probably know I'm also a medical doctor, so that's not obviously connected to being an artist, but actually the more I reflected, the more I felt the connection and the significance of that. So let me just describe a little bit about my background. So I was born in Somerset on a farm. Um, the farm was on a ley line facing Glastonbury Tor. And I was born in the 1960s
Wow.
and we had lots of new age hippies as when I was a small child who were like having bed and breakfast and who stayed in our big rambly farmhouse. Lots of people coming and going with camps and lots of activity. And so I was exposed to quite a different childhood. It was quite a wild kind of early few years. And then as a family, we had to relocate for various family reasons. So we ended up on a boat to Canada when I was 3. Um,
Mm.
where we ended up in Canada. There was a sort of major snowstorms and very very challenging time for the relocation, and that sort of lasted a few years before my mother brought myself and my sister back to the UK. So we came back and we ended up living in on the coastal area of Somerset, so which a lot of our other family lived in. So that my childhood was kind of based in right on the coast, running over sand dunes, barefooted, watching sunsets. So even though ultimately I'd had quite a traumatic kind of early childhood in some ways, relocating countries and so on. I think
Mm.
I always had a sense of connecting to nature, and being in touch with nature, just spending a lot of time kind of watching sunsets and being on the beach. And I think that gave me a sense of inspiration and hope that you can still see in my paintings today. So I've painted all my life, and I come from, I'd say, a very diverse family that's diverse in terms of um, location, in terms of wealth, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of sexuality. and also very artistic as a family. So that's always allowed me and other people in my family to be, I'd say, to be creative, to be ourselves, to not be restrained, just to be at ease in our skin.
Open.
Yeah,
Hmm.
open-hearted. So as a child, I'd kind of describe myself as I was, if you met me as a small child, I was probably quite kind of dreamy and open-hearted, and I'd describe this phase of my life as kind of full of curiosity as well. So,
Mm.
and I was trying to reflect, what are the kind of, that's that particular stage. And my family, I think, are very curious. They're always interested in people, interested in how things work, interested in the world, interested in politics. And that sort of curiosity is, I think, something that's a key feature that is about the inquiring mind, whether it's in the sciences or in the arts, um, and
Mm.
and about creativity. So that's kind of yeah, a little bit of my sort of origin story, I guess.
Yes, that sounds like you were raised in a good time and in good conditions to be a creative person. I would
Yeah.
have definitely loved to live in the 60s. Especially, did you know Glastonbury is actually the heart where the heart chakra of the earth is? It's
Uh,
very special place.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Well, I was born right there, so
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
No,
Now
and
I understand better.
yeah, yeah, and our
But
family
how
farmed
did you,
in that
Joe,
area.
how did
Yeah.
you come from the medical background? I mean, you said you always painted, but how happened this transition? What was the calling to leave the medical world and go in the artistic, creative world?
Well, I'd say, I mean, across my career, I've, had a whole profession as a public health doctor. So most of my calling, I'd say, has been sort of more on the healing side. And what I've been reflecting about today is how I wove the sort of my artistic abilities and insights into that as a career, and also now into what I'm doing now. So as a child, I always painted. I did a lot of art classes and pottery. I always loved the arts,
Mm.
but I've always had a strong sense of purpose about sort of making the world a better place, and that's partly because of the my background influences, I think. And when I was 16, I went on a school trip to India to help out with different medical camps, and that was a great influence on me coming from a sort of rural location. Um, I'd always wanted to be a farmer, in fact, up until then. And it was
Okay.
yeah, and it was only after that trip that I actually thought, well, maybe I should become a healer. And that was sort of my calling to go into to medicine and to go more into a healing world. So at that time, art was something I always enjoyed doing, and it was always something I'd do in my spare time, but it wasn't what I was primarily doing. But ultimately, going into medicine, that's quite an immersion, as you can appreciate, years of training, working as a junior doctor, 120-hour weeks, and so that a lot of my sort of early life was quite full in terms of being a professional medical doctor. I trained as a GP initially, but I always wanted to work in global health, and
Mhm.
to and ended up working in public health or training in public health to be able to do that. Um, and that also meant I've had a career working in policy nationally in the UK on things like climate change, violence prevention, how to create population well-being, and then also with the World Health Organization, where I worked on climate change in Central Asia. I lived in Rome and Europe. And then from there worked on with the Commonwealth, where I headed up both health and education, designing health systems that were sustainable, and had to strengthen education and training as well, across 50 plus countries around the world. So had a very full and professional career, and sort of more latterly, my sort of main area of a focus of work has been around advising a group of former heads of government on how to address threats to human existence. So, sort of
Mm,
cumulatively, I've sort of um, essentially worked more and more around what I'd describe as being the shadow side of humanity. Whether it's
mm,
about understanding violence and the drivers for violence, or about sort of how we might end up um, ultimately exterminating ourselves, in terms of human civilization. So I've done some very big picture kind of areas of work. I'm still involved in that, and also involved in how to strengthen leadership, transformational leadership, planetary leadership, to address
mm,
many of these challenges. So, so you wouldn't necessarily think naturally I was an artist from that story, but actually I've always been an artist, and
mm.
it has been, I think, a really key aspect of my professional life, and my journey to where I am today. So. So if I could, so I might need to explain that a little bit, um, in essence. But looking at the planetary arts movement, essentially, if I just sort of fast track to that, and then I'll kind of describe the story a little bit more, as to
Yes.
how I got there. I think just to complete the sort of what I'd say is my outer world, my outer professional kind of career. So dealing with existential threats, that's a key challenge to the world. And if we deal with it in the normal kind of ways, improving leadership and policy and the sort of governance infrastructure, that's a lot of what I've been working on in the last few years. You'll see that that's only had limited success. Um, and the scientific world, medicine is very scientific in many respects. That's only had limited success in terms of how it's being applied to addressing global challenges as well.
Mm,
The pandemic, everyone's forgotten the pandemic and moved on. But one of the key factors I think is that actually science is very difficult for a lot of people to understand. It doesn't engage hearts.
mm.
A lot of people might
It's
only
very
understand.
analytical. Yes.
Yeah, it's very theoretical, it's quite conceptual, it's very factual. People might only understand a little bit of what you're talking about because it's such an area of expertise. So when you're trying to sort of engage politicians and policymakers who are often not from a scientific background, they, you can see them phasing out, let's put it that way, and switching off, or they might sort of, have a bit of attention and say, oh, yes, that's really important. What should we do? But then, because they don't really fully comprehend it often, you can see what's happened is that there's a mismatch of the actions that are needed based on the science and the size of the challenges and the problems, with actually what actually happens in terms of whether it's policy or policy delivery, and things like
Hmm.
funding, finance that kind of help to energize that. So there's a significant mismatch. So this is a real challenge for the world. So one of the things that I've been reflecting on in the last few years, and also with different leaders, is to try and think, how can we actually create the change that's actually needed? And one of
Mm.
those aspects is around advocacy and transforming the nature of leadership as well. And one of the key
Oh.
ways of doing this, I think, is through the arts. So I had the very fortunate opportunity through something called the World Academy of Art and Science, which I've been a fellow of for the last few years, mainly because of my work on existential threats and global security challenges. that to actually take forward an initiative around the planetary arts or the arts agenda under the umbrella of the World Academy of Art and Science. And a key aspect of that has been about how um, historically the World Academy of Art and Science was set up by famous scientists like
Mm.
Einstein and Oppenheimer in the 1960s, as well
Yes.
as artists like Henry Moore and Buckminster Fuller, and also supported by Peggy Guggenheim and folk like Salvador Dali and Max Ernst. There were a lot of supporters in the 1960s, and it was all about the idea of how you can bring the arts and sciences together for creative solutions to make the world a
Mm.
safe place. So obviously, still very significant today. So
Definitely.
so basically, I'd reached the point where I'd recognise the need to enhance advocacy in terms of addressing threats to human existence. Um,
But tell us, Joe, how do you see art functioning differently than politics and science in addressing the threats and the existential needs that we still are facing as a global challenge?
yes, yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the key things that, the arts and the sciences have become increasingly siloed and operate in different spheres over the last decades. I think actually there was sort of greater connectivity probably back in the 60s and 70s, and that there were different policy shifts that actually kind of created that division more significantly. But ultimately, the and this was also, and if I sort of demonstrate this maybe through reflecting on my own kind of life course and how I've incorporated the arts with the sciences, then that also helps bring to life how the opportunities of working together with the arts and the sciences. So one of the key aspects about the arts is about how it inspires innovation and creativity, and having creative solutions. And that's actually a process. That's a mental process
Mm.
that the sciences tend to just be very narrow, kind of linear, reductionist. So, for example, my medical course was very, you learnt a lot of facts. It was very much about evidence-based medicine, which tends to excel at where you just have one intervention in a very defined population, and you just alter kind of minor details and study the comparison. Um, so it doesn't really reflect real life situations. Whilst in the arts, you actually need creativity, innovation to come up with kind of more comprehensive solutions to address our complex challenges. And I think that's sort of one of the things that I'd reflect on as I progressed with my public health career, is that actually challenges understanding the root causes of global issues like violence, um, you know, uh,
Wars. Mm.
inequalities, wars, climate change. They're very complex challenges. And actually, having a reductionist approach, a scientific approach that just looks at single issues, of which we've got incredible detail and knowledge about single issues, but it
Mm.
doesn't join up, it doesn't connect. So
Yeah.
the arts helps to bring a unitive or a holistic approach and
Hmm.
enable an ability to understand complex systems. So, and that's something I ended up doing a lot of in my career. So, in terms of, I used my artistic abilities to see, to be able to understand really deep, complex challenges like, how to prevent violence, what
Mm.
understanding the root causes of it, the root causes of war, and then to be able to communicate that. So I think that's one of the other kind of key aspects is it's one thing to understand it, but it's another thing to be able to use creativity to actually and understand those systems, but then to come up with solutions, and then finally to be able to communicate what are those solutions. And that's something,
Mm,
again, that I've done a lot of during my professional career. So, as a public health doctor, especially, I would be, I'd give a lot of presentations. I'd, do summary pictures of these, very complex kind of issues to bring light and understanding in terms of the interrelationship of some of these challenges. And I remember people saying to me, I get it now. I suddenly understand what that's about.
mm.
So
That's beautiful.
it's the
That's beautiful.
ability.
So
Yeah.
would you say, I mean, with your medical background, that art, or in which way would you agree is art medicine for this world?
I'd say art is definitely a healing a factor to enable healing of the world. Yes, and that's something I think is part of my kind of wider calling or vision for the world. Is I've learned how to and collectively we've learned how to heal people, individuals. And we know a huge amount about how to create health and well-being in populations of people. But if we
Mm,
can translate that learning to the world, to the planet, how can we actually heal the planet? How can we heal the world? That would be absolutely incredible. And I think the arts is a key catalyst to be able to that can enable us to do that. So,
mm.
um,
That's beautiful. That's beautiful that we have exactly the subject that this podcast is about. Art heals the community, the
yeah,
individual, and the interrelationships that go with this.
yeah,
So I think that's a very important concept that is, yeah, the anchor, you could say, of the art heals movement. And Joe, which or what is the difference to other movements and organizations that follow the same path to art heals, like the Club of Rome or others?
I'd say a key aspect about the planetary arts movement is how it's engaging people all around the world, and a lot of young people as well, because one
Mm,
of the key factors is that it's engaging the heart. It's not just about heads. The science is about the head, the intellectual kind of motivation. Um, but actually, the planetary arts is about art with purpose, but it's also about our heart with purpose.
mm.
And it's actually about using our hearts as a creative source to address global challenges. So that's,
Yes, yes. We just
yeah,
had another network coordinator, Alina Maslova here, what she
yeah,
does, and that kind of like made me understand really how art can transcend the traumatic conditions people are in. They understand we have climate change, we have all the problems, but they cannot feel it with their heart.
yes, yeah,
And art can help us open
mm,
this yeah walls that have been built, to protect themselves on the people, to open their heart and really feel the
mm,
problem and also the urgency.
yes, yeah. And I think there's something about, one of the things I was reflecting on is about the artistic process.
Mm.
Um, and what does it mean to be an artist, I suppose, as well, and what's the process of that compared to science? But it's also that there's an overlap because it's about creativity and innovation, and it's how do you become more creative and therefore more able to innovate and create solutions for the world. And I think one of the key aspects of it is about being able to um, it's sort of being able to connect to the wider world. So for me as an artist, whether, and I was thinking about the process when I sit down and um, design something from a professional point of view, like maybe a policy on, global security or something like this. um,
Yeah.
it takes an enormous amount of focus. So the actual process of it is very similar to when I go and paint a picture. Um,
Mm,
so it's, what I tend to do is, make sure that I've kind of cleared all clutter, all mental clutter, all sort of distractions, and annoyances, so that I've got clear space to kind of actually be able to concentrate and focus on whatever it is I want
mm,
to create or design. And then there's a period of preparation. So it's a case of planning, designing, preparation, which again is very a mental aspect, but it's but I think it helps then to focus. And when I'm doing kind of professional kind of work as in sort of say global security, it will probably just kind of continue. The focus is more still mentally that you just I will go into kind of like almost kind of like a zone or a somewhere that I'm just really focused, and I can just sort of it all comes together mentally as I'm sort of designing something. But
yes,
the additional aspect is when I paint is that it's not just in the mind, it's also in the heart, and it also
definitely.
quite a physical process. So it's like your whole body is in flow, or
Yes, like a
is focused.
channel.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like a channel, and it's in
yeah,
a timeless space. It's and that I think is a very unique kind of space that can be applied to lots of different situations. It's not just
yes,
creation of a piece of art, but it's it can be about creating any number of things, as well. And it's a very creative place where you can create solutions. And then the other aspect I think that also helps consolidate that is the relax phase after that, because often
mm,
it's quite intense, and energetically it's quite intense, and it's actually quite
yes,
tiring afterwards. I mean, it's very um, it makes you feel very rejuvenated. But whether you're doing mental work or kind of like a more of a full body, and I guess people who dance and act and stuff, have to go, really into that zone. It's very intense energetically. So afterwards, I then have a sort of relax phase, and I
mm.
describe that as bimbling. It's often bimbling. So
Okay,
people bimbling. So it might just be, like cooking supper, or washing up, or taking the dog for a walk, or it's something that's kind of involves a little bit of physical activity that's sort a bit automatic, but that's often
yeah.
where original ideas um
Integrate the energy
yeah, yeah,
that the body has released.
yeah. And
Yeah,
that
that's so
generates another,
beautiful.
yeah, it generates another wave of creative solutions often in that phase. It's unintentional,
Yes,
it emerges, it just bubbles up. So
yes,
yeah, so I was just thinking about the sort of, the process is very similar, but actually learning about it from the arts, because the arts allows that it's almost like training the body mentally and with your heart, to be able to go into those creative places to enhance one's creativity in any number of different
yeah.
fields.
You
Yeah,
connecting to something higher.
yeah,
Yes, that's like my favorite place to be,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
So, Joe, we're coming close to the end. Unfortunately, I had so many more questions
Already.
for you. So, you will have to return, definitely.
Okay.
We have here a tradition that each artist leaves a word about his artistic process.
Mm.
And yeah, the artist before you left you the word self-awareness. How does this resonate with your art?
Yeah, I'd say it's about something about art is often entering a different part of one's mind that's almost automatic. It's not coming from, it's coming more from my heart. So I actually have to sit down and actively reflect, like I did this afternoon under
Mhm.
the tree, to have the awareness about what the process is, to actually think it through. So, but actually, then that enriches it, the ability to give narrative to kind of different states of being and the artistic world. I think is able then to enhance the role that art can play more widely as well.
Mhm.
So
And
that's
which
what I would
word
say.
would you like to leave for the next guest that resonates with your art?
So I think a key aspect that has woven throughout my life is about being a catalyst for change.
Catalyst. Okay, I love this word.
And it's
That's
about,
very powerful.
I've always seen myself as a catalyst for change, and that
Hmm.
connects me both as a scientist and an artist. So, from a medical perspective, in terms of understanding the human body and health, catalysts are like really, really, really tiny things. They're
And where do you find
and they
your
can,
inspiration, Joe, to do all these things? I mean, it's such a huge task, right?
yeah, yeah. So just to say, so the catalyst can, it's such a tiny thing. We're only tiny people in a big world, but it can have a huge impact in creating massive change. So that's part of my inspiration is even though
Hmm.
we might feel small in this massive universe, if we see ourselves as catalysts for, creative change to actually change the world to become the world we want, then there's hope. Um, and
Yes,
and that's a
that's
key
so
aspect.
important to have hope.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
And to have a
I
vision,
totally agree.
yeah, and using arts as the vision for to actually envision the future, and give hope to the rest of the world to actually create that change that's needed.
What a beautiful episode. Thank you so much, Joe, for being my and our guest. And thank you for the uh, great job you're doing. I hope to see you soon here again. And to our audience, please leave us your thoughts in the comments, share this episode if it inspired you, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you, Joe.
A big thank you. Thank you so much for everything you're doing as well, and to everyone else. Be the change that you need to see the world become, and we can co-create this together. Thank you.
Thank you.